Hello and welcome to the Bill Parker National Security Show. I'm your host, Dr. Bill Parker, and we have a great show for you today. Joining us today is Miss Jenifer Austin. Miss Austin, it's great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you, Bill.
And Miss Austin managed and was the co-founder of the Google Ocean program, which included the best consumer map of the ocean available in Google Earth and Google Maps. She went on leave from her PhD at Stanford to work directly for Google's co-founders in 2004. I don't know about all of you guys, but I didn't get an invitation in 2004 to go work for Google's co-founders. In 2007, she co-founded the Google Earth Outreach Program, which supports nonprofit groups using Google's geo tools to change the world. She co-led the launch of Google Ocean in 2009. And if that wasn't enough, she went on and partnered with Caitlin Seaview Survey and Underwater Earth to launch Underwater Street View in Google Maps in 2012. And we're going to talk about that. It's really cool. She also conceived of and co-led the launch of Global Fishing Watch in November of 2014 at the IUCN conference in Sydney with Oceana. The Google Ocean program received the Wild Aid Leadership Award, the 2012 Blue Frontier Peter Benchley Excellence in Exploration Award, the 2009 Aquarium of the Pacific's Conservation Award, and the 2009 Heal the Bay, Walk the Talk Award, Bring Back the Beach Award. Jenifer holds an undergraduate degree in biology, a master's degree from Stanford University in neuroscience, and has done marine research at the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Florida State University, and the University of Washington's Friday Harbor Labs. She's a scuba diver and fellow national member of the Explorers Club 14, and she co-founded oceanagenda.com to bring solution creators together to create a forum for the envisioning of a healthy, sustainable blue planet. Again, it's great to have you on the show, Jenifer. So I'm going to jump right in here. You've obviously been involved and led so many efforts in the improvement of our planet, but I'd like to start with Google. How did it start? What role did you play at the beginning? How was that? It has to be incredible because today, all of us, I don't know how many times a day, 50 times a day, I say, I'm going to Google that. I'm going to look at Google Oceans. I'm going to look at Google Maps. It's part of our lexicon, and yet you were there at the beginning. So would you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so at the beginning, or how I got into it, actually, when I was a grad student at Stanford, and one of my roommates worked at Google. And so we had these Google bouncy balls, these green, big, giant yoga balls all over our house, which he'd gotten there. And I was like, huh, that's weird. The tech boom was going on. And I was working on cultured neurons at the time, and they started dying. And then there was this advertisement to work for the founders of Google. And my other roommate had worked for the head of Oracle, and so he's like, "Oh, like that would be amazing. You should apply." And I was like, "Okay," but it seems like far afield from what I'm doing. But I just applied randomly and made it through many rounds of interviews, including interviews with Larry Page and Sergey Brin, who were the co-founders. And I got offered one of the positions to work for them. And so then I went on leave for my PhD to join, and it was maybe 4 months. I joined in April, which was a few months before they filed the S1 to go public. So it was insane time. Everyone fit. There was less than, I think, 2,000 people at the time, and they all fit in one building in what is now, it was formerly the Silicon Graphics campus in Mountain View, and it has these four giant buildings, and we all kind of fit into, just moved into like one of them and part of another, and they were redoing the other building, so it was like really small, and they still had like the legal happy hour and everything. And when we came in, we got sort of introduced to a lot of the early employees. It was just a really surreal sort of I would say kind of startup experience, getting to meet them, before Google went public and people knew. I mean, they didn't realize how, I think maybe the founders knew how big it was going to be, but most people in the world didn't realize how huge Google was going to be. So it was this just sort of amazing, like seeing it grow from kind of a small startup, smallish, to what became a really giant company.
So, okay, so let me just paint this picture here if I got this right. So you're doing a PhD at Stanford, and you're not like 50 years old when you're doing this PhD at Stanford. You're a pretty young person at the time. And
Yeah.
you have roommates at Oracle who works at Oracle and Google. So, okay, so your PhD studying self and your roommates from Oracle and Google, and now you apply for this job at Google, go through all the iterations. How many people are working at Google at this time? Guess. I mean, I don't need an exact number.
It was like I think something like under 2000. So it was pretty small at the time.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. Okay, so you and I talked about this before. You had mentioned to me a gentleman by the name of Michael T. Jones. And anybody that has studied Google and the tech world has certainly
Oh,
seen his
oh,
name.
Bill, before we jump there, can I just tell you one other story that was
Oh
kind of
yeah,
interesting?
please.
Is that when I was still at Stanford, Larry came and gave a talk in the computer science department. And, this is before the IPO. And I went randomly, and he was talking about like the mission of Google. They wanted to organize the world's information, make it accessible and useful. And I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. Like he was very, I felt inspiring as a leader. And I raised my hand. I was like terrified at the time, and raised my hand, and I said, did you ever regret going on leave from your PhD program? Because he and Sergey both went on leave from Stanford also to start Google, and he said, no, no, I didn't regret it. And then I was just like, oh, well, maybe I could go on leave too. So that was just kind of a funny story. And then, when I interviewed, I think there were over 1,000 people that applied for the role to work for them directly. And when I interviewed with Larry, his cousin was a neuroscientist. So then we just like talked about like neuroscience research. So it was kind of a funny, I don't know, like gift. They hired four of us as associates to work together as a team for them. So it was pretty amazing. And I've
And
got a lot of stories too. I mean, like literally crazy stories. Like I negotiated Google's like Davos World Economic Forum partnership in 2006. And we got me and my colleague associate, we went together to staff them, and we had the white badges. And while we were there, it was like one of the coldest nights on record in Zurich. Um, and while we were there, like the plane we were in, the founder of Gap's plane, and it broke, like it froze, like the pipes froze. And like Larry and Sergey needed to get back for a really important meeting. So I was like calling all these jet people like that I had met, like at the Google party, at the Kirchner. And I was like, does anyone know how we could get a plane, a backup plane? So we were finally like, we got like the last backup plane that we could get out of Zurich, and but it was smaller than our previous plane. And like Larry and Sergey had said, like, 'cause, people will offer rides to people. They had offered a ride, I think, like Al Gore, Gavin Newsom, and Chris Rock were all gonna fly back with us. Um, but like there wasn't as much space, and then like Chris Rock had a lot of luggage, so he had to like send some of my shipping. And then we're all in the plane, and this is before Al Gore's movie had come out, but he like gave the talk to us all like on the plane with his laptop, and we're all like like standing around him as he's giving the what became, I think, Inconvenient Truth. So it was like this really surreal experience, and like Chris is making funny jokes, like he was hilarious. And then there wasn't enough space, they like several of us had to sit up facing each other, and Al Gore was like the gentleman, and he's like, well, I'm going to sit up, the whole flight back. And then Gavin Newsom, he's like, well, I am too. And so they were like sitting facing each other, and I was like next to them. And then like Gavin was like the mayor of San Francisco at the time, and he was giving, Al was like, what are your plans, for San Francisco? And Gavin was like giving his like, like, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Well, how are you going to, address traffic? And he's like, well, and homelessness. And he was giving these very like sincere things. And like Larry and Sergey are like, well, you should put in ski lifts so that people could get around by ski lifts. And Gavin's like, he wasn't sure whether to like take it seriously or not, because they have sometimes very like bold ideas. And then he was just like, I don't know. And I was like, yeah, what about ski lifts, Gavin? And Gavin was just like, well, we can look into it, And it was like the most surreal surreal experience. So we had, that was just one like snapshot, but there were just all these amazing people that came through um, when I was working for the founders. So it was really phenomenal. And Larry and Sergey are really amazing, like just like brilliant and thoughtful and just amazing leaders. And it was just like really so cool. And part of the thing that led me into, you're going to say, Michael, is, we had all these people that would come by our office. And we got to meet like Robin Williams, the CEO of SAS, who Google built a lot of their public sort of like how we treat employees, like their the benefit plan based on Jim Goodnight's role modeling. So it was just really just this amazing, exciting time. And then I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to ask about Michael.
Please, no, go ahead. This is a fascinating story. But first, you were there for 14 years at Google?
Yeah, just under 14.
And would you just talk a little bit about what changed? What major changes did you see from the time you started to the time you ended? You obviously said you had about 2,000 people when you kind of rolled in there very early. What changed besides that Google was known worldwide by the time you left?
Yeah, I mean, I think like when I started, it was quite small. And like they still had like legal happy hours, everybody fit into the four buildings of the SGI campus. And so it kind of felt like a community, like you could walk across the, uh, upper walkway to go to the legal party, or social happy hour. You could, um, like you would see people really easily from all parts of the company, whether it was marketing or sales, engineering, product, you would really run into everyone. And then, when I left, it was over, way upwards of 50,000 people. Um, and so it had grown. So, like Geo, for instance, like when I first joined Geo after the Geo division, after working for Larry and Sergey for a couple of years, it was in one of those main four buildings, but then it moved across the street and then it moved to this other building and then it moved across the street from that building because as Google kept hiring more people, they just grew and grew and grew. So the divisions kind of moved out and I think it just changed the dynamic. It was hard I feel like a lot gets done when you run into people and talk to them. And so I think then it became a little bit more siloed. And I think things just change as you get bigger and scale and have a lot more projects. But yeah, I would say, you know, unfortunately, some of the big corporate sort of Machiavellian uh, big company traits I felt came out, when I first started like early on, right? I remember this recruiting event that we went to in Switzerland, and these women were saying, um, like if we join, like we have family responsibilities, like how do we deal with that, right? Because they had very strong responsibilities in Switzerland, you know, uh, and Larry at the time he said you could just, you could come and help, make the solution for how we would handle that, how you could balance that in our company. Like there was this view that you could be a part of solving that, wear many hats, help figure that out. And that was kind of like a mindset I kept with me. And then toward the end, that was really not valued. Like your view was not valued, you know. And I had a whole experience that, where, I asked for like a meeting and they wouldn't meet with me. And like, like, it's just this like, yeah, we're not going to meet with you. So I feel like it really changed. Whereas in the beginning, you could be a part of really, being listened to as far as policies that affected people.
Sure. And I'm sure you saw a lot of different personalities in leadership positions over those 14 years too, as you went from the original founders to other people in leadership positions. But one of those leaders was Michael T. Jones, and you've mentioned him in the past. Can you tell the audience about Mr. Jones a little bit? Dr. Jones, I think it was.
Michael was like he wasn't actually he was one of the most, I think he had like the most patents at Google actually. But he had dropped out of college, I think, like, like Steve Jobs. Um, but he was super brilliant, like just he was incredibly brilliant, like this polymath. But how did I meet him first? He was one of the founders of Keyhole, which became Google Earth when it was acquired in 2004. And I met him because he was he had been a more senior executive at Silicon Graphics, in a previous role he had been in. And so he kind of had that ability to, like, work in the sort of bigger corporate, you know, schmoozing is not the right word, but it's kind of like what you need to do. Like if you're an executive in one of these like growing companies, like you have to go and like make sure that you talk to the other executives, get buy-in for whatever you're doing and that kind of thing. So he would come with, as many executives did, and hang out around, or be in between meetings around the Larry and Sergey office area. And he was just very like professorial, like just very like kind of mentorly like, and he uh just for me was a really huge mentor for me at Google. And as I joined Geo, whenever I had questions, strategy, I would ask for his advice. And one of my like another mentor of mine, he said, uh, uh, this other mentor, he's like a I don't know, like biotech VC in the Valley, Morton Grosser. He said, half of what you become is how smart you are and how hard you work, but half is what the other people around you think is possible. And Michael really believed that, believed in you, that and I saw him mentor many other people too, that you could become, something, and he would help you, like whatever your background was. And he was just really amazing. And I feel like Larry and Sergey believed like that too. Like they let us join all of, you know, any kind of executive meeting we were interested in, just to see what it was like, how decisions were made. Um, and I feel like had that same attitude. I think they had gone to Montessori schools, so they weren't like confined that, only certain people can do certain things. And so Michael was just really a hero of mine, and he was Google's. He came in, I think, having a role with Geo, but eventually he became Google's chief technology advocate and then spoke about Google products broadly.
Now, amazing individual. You have also spoken in the past about a response system that Google helped establish. Can you talk about that a little bit? And in some of the parts of the world, perhaps Lebanon, others, where there was a major impact?
Yeah, the early people that were running Google Earth, like John Hankey, Brian McClendon, like they were, with Michael, like they were like eager or happy that the technology was used in various ways. And before I joined the Geo team, a PM named Chikai was on he had basically worked to get imagery to first responders after Katrina had hit New Orleans, and they got imagery, like fresh imagery right after satellite imagery after the flooding, and then they were able to send that to the first responders, who then could look at the before and after, see where there was flooding, and then use that to sort of figure out how they went to save people. So then when I joined, I started doing like kind of this, the first case of it was I had met someone with the UN, and Lebanon was being bombed, and they were trying to get UN workers out of Lebanon. So I just kind of like, again, like people, when we're small, you could just wear many hats, you could do whatever. And Google had this concept called 20% time, where you could work on something in your 20% that was personally motivating or that you felt passion about. And so this is something I started doing. Like I was doing something else also. That I was building the Earth Outreach Program, but then I was doing this disaster crisis stuff as a 20% project, and other people were helping me also. Like Matt Manalides was huge on the imagery team. So we were able to get imagery, post the bombing, and then we were able to send it to the UN, and then they could look with Google Earth at the before and after, like overlay the fresher imagery, and then see like how they could potentially route their rescue workers to get people out, get the UN peacekeepers out of Lebanon. So that was hugely powerful. And then after we did that, there was like this kind of ad hoc team of us. We started responding to other crises. So when tornado took out Greensburg, Kansas, we were able to get imagery and deploy it. And what many people don't know is that there are certain local fire groups, like task forces, that can deploy before a foreign government will ask the U.S. for help. And one of those is Menlo, I think Menlo Fire 2. So they're a group in Menlo Park, like a fire station in Menlo Park, that I would say was very progressive at the time. And they could send, disaster responders immediately after the disaster without waiting, because normal diplomatic paths can take a while. So this group that was very like fast responding, they would send people, like they sent people to Greensburg. Then we sent imagery to Texas, to responders responding in Texas, working with NOAA on Hurricane Ike and Gustav, who had come in and wiped out whole neighborhoods, families.
And does that program still exist?
It morphed. I think it does. The Google Crisis Response team. It became a kind of .org project for a while, and they were doing more like showing dynamic data on top of Google Maps from a web browser as more of an educational kind of project. But I don't think, or at least my last time I checked, they weren't still doing the overlays of the imagery. But there was some, work that continued on through the Google.org effort, where they were still helping responders with various dynamic data. And then I would say one of the other, like we sent data also to help with people responding to this Sichuan earthquake in China. And then also to after the tsunami, the big tsunami that hit Japan, we sent roads data. And it was kind of interesting, at the time it took us a while to pull off the roads data set, like to basically pack it onto a drive that could be, sent quickly. And I always thought, that is a huge opportunity, is to have pre-built, areas, so that if there is a big disaster, like you have a virtual, that whole area that doesn't require being online to work. And I think that would be a huge, opportunity, something I always thought would be really cool for people to do for the future. Because the Bay Area, as some people might know, everyone is expecting sometime there's going to be the next big earthquake, right? Well, Google Maps is, not going to be working if no one has internet, right? You'll be like, how do I get home? So it'll be, thinking about those kind of like, it's like ounce of prevention worth a ton of cure. I think that's a huge, area of opportunity.
Absolutely. So there's this other amazing story about underwater street view in Google Maps. Can you talk about how that started, what that is? Unfortunately, I think a lot of people probably still don't exactly know what that is, because most people are like, okay, where is Auntie Anne's house? And oh, can I look at it from street view? But now you're talking about something underwater. How did it start? What is it? How is it used today? What's the value of it?
Yeah, so that's another really cool project. There was, so I think there was like this early like beta attempt by some Googlers in the Australia office to build like a kind of underwater camera to try to take imagery. So So we have like Google Maps has this sort of camera system for above water that they put on cars and drive around, so that like when you look at Street View in Google Maps, you can see the front of your house or see where's the hotel lobby, where might I park before you go there, like that kind of thing. Like that was originally why they created that. Um, and so some people in the Sydney office had tried to create something, and I had tried to convince people on the Street View team internally to work on it because I'm a diver and I love underwater stuff, and couldn't get anyone to work on it. But then this, like an individual with this nonprofit in Australia called Underwater Earth happened to come for a business meeting through a connection from one of the Googlers in Sydney, and I met with him, and I got another engineer to come, and we had this whole conversation, and basically it led to starting to talk about like how could they build a camera, like an underwater camera modeled after, sort of like inspired by the design of our above water cameras or Google's above water cameras, but that could go underwater and take surround imagery. And so they went on to build that. And then I helped, like they got a major sponsor who was interested in funding like science collects, because coral reefs are bleaching around the world, particularly in Australia. And so they got a Catlin, this big insurance company in Bermuda was interested, and they funded some of these science collects. And then I got, Google funding to get them to go to a number of, places that would be of interest to a general consumer audience for travel, things like that. So it was really a magical project, and we launched the first collections in 2012 at the Blue Ocean Film Festival in Monterey, and it was just really amazing and beautiful imagery. You could like go underwater to Molokini Atoll off Maui, and see the coral reefs as if you were diving, and there were these little white arrows you can go click, 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 and kind of go along the reef. There's this, famous sea turtle off Lizard Island in Australia, and you could like visit the sea turtle virtually. And so it's really a really neat project. And the kind of interesting thing about it, that collect was before, like a couple of years later off Maui, they had a big bleaching event. So probably a lot of those corals have since died. So it just highlights the importance of, you can like get a snapshot, you can then allow people to see what it was like. And then if they see change, like seeing is believing, it kind of creates a way for people to connect to a place, that many people won't be able to go to because it's remote, or they have, hearing problems or whatever, right? Like not everyone can go scuba diving or something. So it's this virtual tool just allows people to go visit there. And if you download the Street View app, on your mobile device, and you kind of scroll out to like Australia or Hawaii, you can look at some of these underwater Street View surround collects will come up in the search results, the organic search results in the Street View app, and then you can go and kind of dive under and explore. So it's really amazing. I've taken this, and we expanded to over 100 locations, and they've continued to publish more. And it's really nice because kids just love, shipwrecks and dolphins and mola mola, sunfish, so whale sharks. It's cool.
So do adults.
Yeah, yeah.
So is this all imagery, or is it a combination of imagery and sonar? Or is it all imagery?
The Street View imagery is just imagery.
Yeah, the underwater street view is all
Yeah,
just imagery.
yeah,
So
360.
any security, national security concerns, et cetera? Did that come up in discussions that you can talk about, as you are now kind of painting a picture of what the ocean looks like?
So for the underwater Street View, it's really like a snapshot, in like a few breadcrumb trails along a path, so you go along this coral reef head, off um, American Samoa, or Hanauma Bay off Hawaii. And so for those, I don't think so, because it's some breadcrumb trails in the ocean, like some connected 360 imagery, and it's pretty, I would say, not that voluminous, probably not, maybe not even, geolocated like might be slightly off in the geolocation, things like that. As far as the base imagery, and we haven't delved into the origin of Google Ocean, which I'm not sure if you want me to
Please.
talk about, but that started is a really neat story. So that's like the virtual like seafloor map that's in Google Earth and Google Maps. So 3D in Google Earth, and then you can just see the sort of 2D version in Google Maps from satellite mode. And that project started, so Sylvia Earle, who's a big National Geographic explorer in residence, she was at this conference in Spain, and she was getting an award with the founding CEO of Keyhole, which became Google Earth, John Hankey, who's now the head of Niantic that makes Pokemon Go. And they were both getting awards, and Sylvia went up on stage and she said, I really love Google Earth. My grandkids fly around everywhere, but you should really call it Google Dirt because you're missing all the oceans. And then he laughed and he was like, oh, you're right, Sylvia, why don't you come back to Google and give a tech talk? And this was maybe 2007 or something like that. And I got to help host Sylvia's first tech talk at Google, because I was doing this other thing, but I wanted to help on oceans as a 20% project because I love the oceans. I was a summer fellow at Woods Hole, so I spent time on George's Bank. I love the sea, and so I got to host Sylvia, and she came and she gave this talk. She talked about like the oceans, like why they're important and in trouble. And she said, with knowing comes caring, and with caring, there's hope. And then that got a number of us to start like really working on how could we create a virtual ocean. And another PM and I started talking, and he was also passionate about it, Steve Miller. And then my office mate, Mark Aubin, he had been one of the founders of Keyhole too, and was respected as an engineer. And I was telling him, and he started working on it. And once he started working on it, that got other engineers to start working on it in their 20%. And so they started to figure out how would you connect in underwater terrain with the above water terrain, so that it could be displayed and rendered correctly. And we built relationships with the Navy and NOAA and G8 to start to look at, like the first data set. And then we published this first data set in 2009 in February when we launched Google Earth 5, which had this first virtual map of the ocean. And it was relatively, I would say, low res at the time, like probably maybe a 1 kilometer resolution. So by contrast, if you go look at your house, it's better than 1 meter, maybe 80 centimeters. So it's pretty high res. You can see your car. But out in the ocean, it's most of the ocean's unmapped. So even though it looks like when you look at Google Earth, or it looks like there's data for all the ocean, looks can be deceiving because it's a very low resolution map. Ocean's actually really big, and maybe only 20% of the ocean has been mapped. So the rest of it is all very low resolution from satellite altimetry. But what's interesting is like we worked with like various academics. So I funded work at, while I was at Google at Scripps, where they curate the kind of low resolution global synthesis, working with NRL, Naval Research Lab, and many partners. And then I funded work at Columbia University, at Lamont Doherty, where they curate the high resolution data set. So both groups were, cleaning more research data, putting it into the synthesis, and then we merged them together and made various iterative updates to that global map. And the last update that I was involved in pushing and publishing got the global ocean map to 500 meters, so like half a kilometer. And that was the highest at the time, highest resolution, like in a consumer product map of the ocean that had been published. And a new microplate was discovered, the Mamerix microplate off Australia. So it had never been discovered because, again, right, most of the ocean's unmapped. And people were kind of worried at the time about seamounts, like making them visible, because once you make seamounts that come out of the imagery visible, then fishing vessels are going to target them because fish hang around seamounts. So there was some concern about that, but from the people that I spoke to, it sounded like um, people thought that the fishing vessels already knew where those seamounts were, and so the resolution that we put in was not um, going to be something that like that they hadn't already had access to through other venues before our publication. So, is that true or not? I don't know, but that's what some colleagues had said, and that's why I thought it was okay that we were publishing it. Um, but yeah, I don't. I think I think the bigger thing is just that I think the bigger risk is the amount of areas that aren't mapped and can lead to you know dangerous accidents. Submarines hitting seamounts that are uncharted. And I do think there's a huge opportunity to fund more ocean mapping, because again, like I was talking to one of the captains of the Enchanted Princess vessel, one of Princess's cruise line, and they were going to a place in the Caribbean. It hadn't been mapped since Captain Cook, you know, and there's lots of places, in the Caribbean where people haven't gone back, and so like it's dangerous. We're sending, people. I mean, they paid for a modern map to be done, so they were doing the right thing. But there are all these places, where people are going off Greenland and things like that, that they're not mapped to the extent that you would think that they should be. And again, ounce of prevention worth a ton of cure seems to me like an exciting area to, see greater investment in technologies for mapping those areas.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. I was talking to somebody the other day that was asking, well, why is it there are all these spaces in the oceans where we really don't know too much about? And you remind people that, when you're going across the Pacific, for example, from Los Angeles to wherever, it doesn't matter, overseas, that most people are on the Great Circle route because they want to save as much fuel and energy as possible. So there's actually this very narrow swath of ocean that all the ships are on all the time. It's basically the shipping highway, and beyond that, not a whole lot of ships are on that, especially out in the middle of the ocean. So it's very interesting what you say. So you were talking about fish and seamounts, and that brings me to the Global Fishing Watch. You played a part in this too, a pretty huge part. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I think I don't know if it was 2011 or earlier, but I had been, like included in a number of sort of brainstorming about what we could do for issues in the ocean. And I remember at one of the brainstorms, and I think it was like a National Geographic connected one, there was a colleague of mine at the Coast Guard, who was talking about some of the issues he had seen. And, we were just both talking about how like I didn't realize, but there's all this illegal fishing that goes on, because fishing vessels are not required to be tracked. There is this automatic identification system called AIS where like vessels that are doing, shipping for transit for cargo, they're required to ping, every so often, ping, 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 and they're putting out these AIS signals so that if some other ship is coming along, they're going to see that you're there and they're not going to run into each other.
And just for
So it's like,
clarification, when you say ping, we're not talking about sonar pings. We're talking about pings to the satellite, so you have their exact position.
right, yeah. So like the AIS transponder is sending, a signal that gets picked up by a satellite and then, gathered somewhere. Well, that actually, what happens right now is a lot of people are sending out those AIS signals, and then other ships will be looking for those around them as they're going along, so that if they hear that signal coming from a ship coming near them, they'll know that that they're going to get close, and both of them will move so they don't hit each other. That's the idea. Um, and but fishing vessels are not required to have that AIS on all the time. And so there are good actors who are using it, and maybe they turn it off so people can't see their favorite fishing spot. But there are bad actors who turn it off and they just go into protected areas, fish, sort of ruin the whole point of having a protected area to have spillover, and then, just do whatever they want. And there's weirdly no required, regulation that fishing vessels have this transponding uh, capability. Now, obviously, when they come into ports, they have to have their AIS transponding, but when they're at sea, a lot of times they don't. So to me, it seems like a huge safety at sea navigation problem, but one that has just been allowed to go on for whatever reason for some time. Well, it was brought up at this time like, hey, there's this issue. There are these things that are happening. Like, what could be done what could we do differently? And then I ended up hosting at Google in 2012 the Sea Space Summit, which had just a number of people that were interested in solving various issues. And I had invited colleagues from NOAA, from SkyTruth, Coast Guard, and a bunch of NGOs, nonprofits, and we all got together. Michael came, Michael Jones, and then the CEO of Space Quest came. And what they had been doing very innovatively is they put up a couple of low orbit AIS satellites where they could take that AIS data and detect it from space and then visualize it on a map. So that not only if you're a ship at sea, could you just see the ships, pinging near you, you could see all the ships around you who had AIS. And this was pretty innovative at the time. It hadn't been done, to my understanding, before then. So it was a very valuable data set. And so the CEO of that company came, and the founder of SkyTruth was there, and NOAA, and I started saying like, hey, couldn't we track this, watch these ships and visualize and see what's going on? And then what happened out of that meeting is there was a demo data set that they pulled together. And then an engineer on my team started working on how you could, along with some other engineers, how you could display that data, which is quite a lot of data, onto Google Maps so that you could watch the data moving dynamically. And it was pretty phenomenal. And I know at the time, like that visualization was taken, like Michael took it to, like, I think all the heads of the navies and showed them, like, do you realize that you could see all the ships around you at once? And I don't think they had been seeing that data like that before. So that was 2012. It was really huge. And then a number of conversations ended up having, I hosted this Ocean Agenda conference at Google where people talked further about what we might do. And I would say right before, and I have to say my memory is not 100%, so I apologize, but somewhere in before that 2012 talk, the whole idea for doing this, in addition, was inspired by the first Economist Ocean Summit, which I think was like, maybe it was early in 2012 or 2011. Maybe it was 2012. Sorry, I'll have to look up the exact dates. But there was a keynote by the then president of Iceland, President Grimson, and he was on stage and he said, just like you could see all the planes on Google Earth, why can't you see all the ships? And then I went up to him afterward and I said, you're right. It's true that you can't. Why don't we have that ability? And he said, why don't you come to Iceland and see how we do it there? Because in Iceland, actually, they require all fishing ships, to be tracked. And so Michael and my ocean engineer, we went to Iceland and got to see like how they track all their ships and have a sort of sustainable fishing sort of quotas and tracking, and Trackwell does all their tracking for them. And they're really, like, I feel like, advanced in their thinking about, we need to be holistic. We need, safety at sea and navigation. If your transponder goes off, your fishing vessel, they send a helicopter immediately because they think that they need a rescue. And if it was fake, you have to pay that helicopter bill. So it's very motivational for like everyone wants to, not waste the fish, trade in quotas, be sustainable. And it was an amazing thing. And then that really influenced our thinking. And then later on, that led to getting this global AIS data set with SpaceQuest, visualizing it on Google Maps. And then when I hosted that Ocean Agenda conference before then, I had hosted the CEO of Oceana to a meeting where I talked about this project, how we were working on doing this as a way to like potentially visualize what's going on so people can see what's happening to better, put in better policies. And he was really impressed by Andy Sharpless. And then he came to that Ocean Agenda conference that I mentioned. And then that led, they started working with SkyTruth. And then that led to eventually the launch of Global Fishing Watch, is what it became branded, in 2014 at the IUCN World Conservation Congress. And now it's grown into this giant thing. There are all these like partner countries, and they've been doing great work. I think the head of the National Geographic Ocean Program said that he's been publishing, like his whole last years of work has been publishing stuff on the data from that project. So it's really impactful.
Amazing. So it sounds like from the conversation we've been having that while Google has geniuses everywhere that are thinking up amazing new technologies, it also did a pretty darn good job of collaboration of individuals from outside of Google that were doing similar projects or projects that could be helpful to what Google was interested in, and collaborating and pulling them together. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say, in the beginning, John was supportive of creating this Ocean Advisory Council, Google Ocean Advisory Council. And so a number of people volunteered to join, like give their ideas on what could be impactful as far as data layers about the ocean to overlay on top of Google Earth, among other things, like what would be useful to do. And I think that was really helpful. That brought in a lot of people from different backgrounds, like Larry Maiden at Woods Hole at the time, and he had actually been my advisor, undergrad advisor, when I was a fellow there, so it was kind of neat. And then there were a number of other, academics, Jane Lobachenko, who was then later became head of NOAA, and a number of other like academics, NGOs, different groups, IUCN, who kind of curate a MPA, Marine Protected Area data set. And that had not been visible to the world before we launched their maps so that people could see easily where they were. And I think that's a huge opportunity space. So I think that idea of kind of having a forum where different people from different backgrounds could come and weigh in, I think was hugely powerful. And I think that must have started maybe like 2008. And they advised for some time. And then the Ocean Agenda conference that we had later, like 2015, maybe, or 14, maybe 2014, that goal was, again, to bring people from different backgrounds together to talk about these issues. So there could be, like, we had some breakout groups with people came up with like just ideas of how to solve something, and it led to a number of really interesting ideas. Like Barb Block at Stanford got some idea for a different tuna tracking tag, and there's like this picket fence idea. So people came up with different ideas, and I think this obviously Global Fishing Watch came out. So I feel like there's this opportunity, if you bring people together in some sort of forum, it can really lead to new ideas, because people aren't just talking to the same people. They're talking to people with different expertise areas, and I think it can be hugely valuable.
So we have just a couple minutes left. And as I promised when this started, the hour always goes super fast. But if our audience typed in www.oceanagenda.com, www.oceanagenda.com, what would they find there? Would they be happy about it? Would they be sad? What would they see?
I think that they would see that just there's a lot of work to be done. Like there are great opportunities, like a video, there's some videos from that Ocean Agenda conference that I spoke about, and the videos from the breakout discussions, um, where some creative ideas came out from different people who had joined that conference. So I think there's places of hope, but then there's also huge opportunity. So I just think, you know, there are many groups that have gotten into this space, but there are still many needs, like funding in the middle range of blue economy companies is really lacking. So if we want to have more startups, sort of engaging in the space, there's got to be some capacity building. But there are many of NGOs who you can follow on social media, see what they're doing, keep track, like contribute in whatever way that you want to, that wherever you feel passion, right? NRDC, right, has worked on sound pollution in the ocean. I know you advised on the Sonic Sea film, and they do great work. And there are many other ocean groups that are out there, and you can be a part in smaller or bigger ways, depending on your interest and inclination. And I think it's just to be aware, learn about it, even if it's just taking your kids to or yourself or your friends and exploring the ocean with the technology that exists and learning about it is huge. Because once you, like I said, like Sylvia's quote, like with knowing comes caring, and with caring there's hope. So if you care about something, then you're much more likely to help give a voice to the the sea life and the whales and the fish out there in the sea, who the people on Pacific Islands, who are really being impacted, by storms and whatnot, and could really use our our global thinking on how we could help have a better blue planet.
Jenifer, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much, Jenifer Austin, the co-founder of Google Ocean Program, and has played such a huge part in protecting our environment and continues to. And we hope to have you back sometime on the show again. But thank you so much for spending the time with us today.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Parker. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all your time.